Let's bring in at this point Michael Rubin. He's from the American Enterprise Institute in Washington. Thanks for being on the programme today, sir. Let me ask you, we were just reflecting there on the speed of the Taliban overrunning of Kabul. Did you expect the city to fall so quickly?
I did not expect the city to fall so quickly. Kabul, that is. I expected there to be a last fight there, although the speed of the Taliban through the rest of the country didn't surprise me, simply because the Taliban more often than not will capture cities and towns based on political deals, based on a sense of momentum, based on side deals with which they cut, rather than actually having to fight for them. As quickly as they took the country, remember, they lost the country that quickly back in 2001. Momentum means everything in Afghanistan, as groups will defect in order to live to fight another day.
You talk about momentum. I mean, surely money should be a big factor here as well. I mean, over $1 trillion spent in the last 20 years in Afghanistan. Those cities have fallen effectively in less than a week. Big picture, what went so wrong in your view when it came to this withdrawal?
Well, we essentially kneecapped the Afghan government on the way out. We also simply misconstrued what the mission in Afghanistan was. President Biden made a decision based on domestic American politics. President Trump made the same decision. However, if you look at just the last 5 years, our presence in Afghanistan wasn't much more expensive than our presence in Japan and South Korea. It had a tremendous amplifying effect, and we suffered fewer casualties than Americans have suffered in automobile accidents in Baltimore, Maryland. The fact of the matter is we finally found a formula that was working, and President Biden simply, for domestic political reasons, pulled the carpet out from underneath all of Afghanistan.
Mr. Rubin, if you'll forgive me, are you suggesting then that US forces should have stayed in Afghanistan far longer? Briefly, if you can.
Yes, I am. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, when he got on television and said it was a choice between this and a new surge, that's a false choice. We had found a formula where with about 9,000 troops, we were able to maintain control and amplify the Afghans to enable them to have control over all the provincial capitals. That's what went wrong. If we removed our forces from South Korea, we might see the same thing occur as North Korea runs roughshod over the South.
All right, Michael Rubin, thank you for your thoughts. Stay with us if you can. I want to bring back in Philip Turle, our Foreign Affairs editor. Philip, I think a question a lot of people are asking at the moment is the Taliban today. How similar are they to the Taliban that we remember from 20 years ago and the brutality, the oppression of women that we so associate them with?
Well, that's the question, Nadia, that nobody can answer right now. And the Taliban themselves have been trying to put forward a more reassuring message over the past few days, saying that they will not bring back the same practices that we saw during their time in power from 1996 to 2001. But I think a lot of people are not believing what the Taliban says. And if you look at Taliban ranks themselves, there's been a split within the old guard and the new guard within the Taliban itself. And it's unclear which of those two sides is really going to pull the strings and be in charge of making the big decisions in Afghanistan now that they appear to be taking power completely of the whole country. So we could be looking at a return to some of the darker practices, some of the more horrendous things that have happened to people there. Notably, they've already made it clear that girls will be able to go to school, but only until the age of 12, that women will have to give up work, that music and cinema will be banned, and that there will be possibly the kidnapping of adolescent girls to be forced into marriage with Taliban fighters. There are witness accounts that has already been the case. There are witness accounts that women have been murdered because they're not properly dressed. So there is a lot of reason to fear that even though the Taliban is trying to be reassuring and saying to people, you've nothing to worry about, we're not going to be violent, we're not going to take revenge on any of you for what has happened over the last 20 years, that those practices will return to the country now that they're in power?
Well, let's go now to Kabul. We can speak to our correspondent Bilal Sawari, who is standing by for us there. Bilal, thanks for your time on France 24 today. This has obviously been extremely dramatic for those of us watching from abroad, obviously all the more so for you. Tell us a little bit about what the atmosphere is like where you are in Kabul right now.
Well, I've seen some signs of life, picking up, people coming out, some women, but not in great numbers. Some restaurants were open. The butcher shop, vegetable shops in some areas have opened. But this is not the Kabul, my city, with traffic jams and the hustle and bustle of life. So obviously, people are still waiting before they can come out. What we also heard from the Taliban, that they had arrested certain people, we're not sure who they are, in a Twitter announcement, who are going around the homes of former officials and members of parliament and picking up their guns and vehicles. So we'll have to wait and hear more from the Taliban. At the same time, the Taliban today also managed to reactivate the radio systems for the police headquarters so that their fighters and soldiers could talk to the various police stations. We have to really remember Kabul is a city of at least 6 million people. Massive investments have been made here, and there's serious concern among the residents as well as the private sector about the chaos and looting. At the same time, we are still waiting to hear more from the Taliban exactly what sort of a government we might be looking at. The formation of a new government, who could be leading it. Those are the details that we're waiting for.
Bilal, we're hearing some noise behind you where you are. We hope everything's all right where you are in that part of the capital. It's worth saying that the Taliban, at least publicly, are saying they want a peaceful transition of power. In terms of that new Taliban government, do we understand what it's going to look like? What's happening in terms of the formation of a Taliban government?
Just to reassure you that there must be some technical issues. I cannot hear anything where I am. So I'm all fine, but we'll have to wait and hear more from the Taliban on that, on the formation of a new government. At the moment, there's very, very little information available to us.
All right, Bilal Sawari for us there in Kabul. Thanks very much indeed for your reporting. Michael Rubin from the American Enterprise Institute. I hope you're still with us from Washington. There you are, sir. Thanks for staying with us. I'd like to ask you, if I can, I understand that you've spent a little time in Afghanistan and in Pakistan as well. You've been spending some time trying to understand the origins of the funding of the Taliban. What can you tell us today about how much influence Pakistan has on the contemporary Taliban?
Well, certainly Pakistan is to the Taliban what Iran is to Lebanese Hezbollah. Simply put, the Taliban's idea of having an Islamic emirate with a religious leadership that would be unelected but appointed isn't popular among most Afghans, including among most Pashtun in eastern Afghanistan, which is one of the reasons why the Taliban will never want to go to elections, because they would know they've been rejected. The Pakistan, however, and specifically their intelligence service, the ISI, sort of embraced the Islamic extremist model after 1971, when they lost East Pakistan, what became Bangladesh, because in the Pakistani strategic thinking, if you have countries or groups that have an ethnic identity, they could actually chip away at the sovereignty of Pakistan. Remember, there's Pashtun in Afghanistan, Pashtun in Pakistan, and the Pakistani idea was, if everyone just has a more radical Islamist identity, that will be safe for Pakistan. The problem is, whenever you've had jihadism, extremism for export only, you've ultimately had blowback. That's what we saw in Syria. That's what we saw in Saudi Arabia, in Libya, and elsewhere.
All right, Michael Rubin, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.